All right, can everyone see the screen? All right.
Yes.
So this is the Board of Zoning Appeals workshop for May 12th, 2021. The workshop agenda, we have two new items. The items are 380 Whitehall Road and 40 South Manning Boulevard. The first case, 380 Whitehall Road. The applicant is Congregation Beth Abraham Jacob. The representing agent is Dan Hirschberg. This is in a mixed-use campus institutional zoning district. The variances being requested originally were three, actually, but in reviewing the application, I recently noticed that one of them actually does not apply because it's not in a front yard area. So that one has been striked out here. So the variances that are being applied here are for a proposed 8-foot tall fence of three different types. So there's 710 linear feet of 8-foot tall chain link fencing. 198 of those are in the front yard area, and this is the particular section where you're requesting a variance from this. Actually, the whole part of it, since it's 8 feet tall, where chain link fencing is not allowed. 332 linear feet of 8-foot tall vinyl fencing. So that's 100% opacity, but the opacity does not apply since this is in a rear yard area. And 438 linear feet of 8-foot tall metal spaced picket fencing. And so the part of this that the chain link that will apply to this is the portion, the 100 linear feet of the chain link fence that's in the front yard area. So this is 380 Whitehall Avenue. You can see if you can see my mouse, the playground is right behind the building on this area here, and this is where the 8-foot tall, 100% opacity fencing will be, and then the remainder of the fencing will be around the perimeter of the fence of the property, which I can show you here. This is just contextually. It's situated in front of the New York State Thruway, next to William Sharon and B'nai Shalom Reform Congregation, and then residential medium, single family medium density to the front of it. This is an overview of the property along with the zoning district. You can see here low density to the front, medium density immediately across the street, and land conservation, I believe, to the rear. So this is the site plan. We have colored coordinated diagram here showing the placement of the different types of fencing. So I believe, maybe hard to read, but red is going to be the chain link fence. Yellow will be the iron fencing. And then the cyan here will be the 100% opaque white vinyl privacy fencing. So all of these fencing types are 8 feet tall. This portion right here, if you see my mouse, if this is the front wall plane of the structure, then this portion right here, which is approximately indicated here, would be in the front yard area. And this is the chain link fence that would be in question for the variance. So the variance for chain link fencing in the front yard area would only apply to this. The rest of the chain link fencing, as material goes, would be allowed, but the height would still be regulated by the front yard area. So 4 feet would be allowed in this area, and then 6 feet throughout the rest. That's behind his wall plane. Same with this, because you have a Whitehall Road here. This would be the front yard area here. So anywhere in this area would be considered 4-foot height max, and the requested variance is 8 feet here. And the next one is an overlay with the color coordination and a Google Earth overview. And you can see, kind of visualize where the fencing will be. Like I said, red is going to be the chain link behind here where the playground is, starting from there around the corner to the front here, to the front yard area here. extends outward towards the south, I think it's Manning extension, and then it turns into an iron fence type here and around, and goes back into black chain link, and then into the white vinyl fencing here around the playground. So the ordinance in question is going to be our walls and fences ordinance, which states on any lot with an occupied principal structure in any zoning districts except the light industrial and general industrial districts, walls and fences may be located in any front yard or exterior side yard facing a street, provided they are no more than 4 feet in height and no more than 60% opaque. And the second variance part would be materials for walls and fences, which would indicate chain link fencing is prohibited in any front yard area except the light industrial or general industrial zoning district. So the variance review criteria will be whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variance. And actually, I'm going to go through these one by one and kind of highlight the applicant's consideration as well as staff comments on it. So the first one, the applicant was asked to demonstrate how the proposed parking would be in character with surrounding properties. And the applicant stated that the proposed fence is not out of character with the neighborhood. The fences were indicated to be a distance away from the city right-of-way and sidewalks. As such, it would not be out of character with the neighborhood. Whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. So the applicant was asked to identify the benefit they were seeking with the variance and whether any other means could be used to achieve that benefit that would either reduce or eliminate the need for a variance. So the applicant stated that the minimum height was needed to prevent intruders, and because many violent anti-Semitic incidences have been carried out by a lone individual. The third, whether the requested area variance is substantial. So the applicant was asked to indicate why the requested variances are not a substantial or contextually significant deviation from the prevailing regulation. And the applicant stated that the 4-foot increase over the regulation, which is a 100% increase, was not substantial because the fences are required to provide security from anti-Semitic incidences. Fourth, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district. The applicant was asked to describe any potential impacts on such factors such as drainage, traffic circulations, dust, noise, odor, public services, etc. The applicant stated that the granting of the variance will not result in the creation of any adverse impacts. And then lastly, whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which should be relevant to the decision but not necessarily preclude the granting of the area variance. So the applicant was asked to explain why the need for the variance is not self-created, and the applicant stated that the need for the variance is self-created in this case, but that it was not dispositive. So next we're going to be going over the comments for each of these 5 sections, starting with the first section. So whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. 8-foot fences are not commonly represented in a neighborhood. A maximum height for fencing is set to prevent a detriment to the streetscape. Therefore, the proposed fencing height and materials would be out of character with the neighborhood. Additionally, neighborhood crime statistics are not typically used to determine whether a proposed structure is harmonious to the surrounding community. Next, whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible other than an area variance. The applicant did not clearly identify a benefit sought with the variance beyond preventing entry from unauthorized persons. The applicant did not indicate how specifically the 8-foot fence would prevent unauthorized entrance over a shorter fence. The benefit preventing entry from unauthorized persons is less clear with the chain link fencing, which at taller heights would lend to assist with scaling rather than prevent it. The benefit sought appears to be more able to be addressed with policing ordinances than with the zoning ordinances. And the board should consider the precedent-setting nature of the variance being granted based on the extrapolation of local conditions from national trends and how this could undermine our zoning ordinance. Whether the requested area variance was substantial, the deviation 4 feet is substantial. The deviation of chain link fencing where it is not allowed is substantial. The departure from the ordinance is not reviewed contextually in this case. Whether the proposed variance will have an adverse impact, staff conclusion was the proposed fence would not have adverse impacts or effects. And whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, the requested variance is a self-created hardship. The applicant proposed a fence that was out of compliance at the time of submitting an application.
Thanks, Luis.
Yep.
Could you go back to the first element that the applicant addressed? Does anyone have any questions on this element?
That doesn't have to do with character of the neighborhood. I mean, it has to do with the distance from right of way or sidewalks, but the character of neighborhood should speak to the design features of other fences that are compliant or have been built in the neighborhood. I mean, this may be a fact of the application, but it doesn't speak to the character of the neighborhood in any way.
Yeah, I agree with you, Martin, and I think Luis, when you contact the applicants after the workshop tonight, you may ask them to try a little harder to address the character of the neighborhood. They should at least describe in some way the neighborhood such that their ask is not changing it. So as Martin suggests, they're sort of implying that there are many places in the neighborhood that have fences that are not up to the property line, but they need to actually say those things if they want us to consider it in our analysis. Are there any other questions from the board or comments?
I was wondering if the applicants thought about hedges. I know that certain hedges grow pretty tall. I don't recall seeing that discussed in the application.
Yeah, I think when it comes to alternatives considered, if we can go to that one, I think that speaks directly to that.
Agreed. Do you want to go on to the next element then, Louise? And that would be where your comment. They should address that issue, as Serena pointed out.
Yeah, this isn't really talking. This may talk to their desire for the fence, but this is not alternatives considered. One thing I'm curious about is certainly the front of the property on the Whitehall Road side has a more decorative iron fence. And then along the, what do they call it, the proposed South Manning extension? Can't remember the name of the street, if it's actually a city right away. I believe it is, but why the fence doesn't even continue to the back of the property, which would minimize the need for the variance in that it would remove the request for the front yard chain link fence. And two alternatives considered. I mean, certainly I understand the concerns about security, but they don't speak to alternatives such as, cameras or alarms or, what Serena said, plants to prevent people from even getting to the fence. I mean, that question just wasn't answered in the application at all.
Yeah, could you go back to element 2, Louise? Or to their answer to element 2? So they need to really address the element that's being asked to be spoken to here, which is what is the benefit? They're implying it, they're not saying it. They need to talk about the alternatives that Martin and Serena have brought out, if they're going to speak, if they're going to assert that the benefit is security, then they probably need to actually say something that would suggest that this is a problem in Albany. I mean, we're all aware of the problems in Pittsburgh and other parts of the country, but is this a problem in Albany, or is there some reason to have an expectation that that security for temples is going to be a problem in Albany? So they should address that if that seems to be the core of their argument. So they should probably try and flesh it out. Are there any other thoughts from the board about this?
Yeah, I'd just add, given that we have two areas that are designated front yards here, if the applicant could just provide some information on their thought process as to why we're doing the chain link fence in some areas of what's technically a front yard and why it's the other fence that's on Whitehall, especially, given the point of staff, which I thought was a great point, that chain link fences do lend themselves to helping folks potentially getting into the area they're supposed to be protecting, or stopping intruders from getting into.
Thank you. And I think we could theorize why they have this blend of fences, but they should just tell us. Similarly, I think that the applicant should address why they appear to be only protecting employee parking and not all the additional parking that is surrounding the temple, since the fences leave out a fairly large number of spaces. And if they have a rationale for that, they should tell us that too, because this will be a very substantial variance, among other things. Does anyone have any comments about this element, or should we go on to the next one?
I think this one, just like, and it may be true for others too, and I think we've kind of touched on, but basically there's two different variants being asked, and here they're only talking about the height and not at all the material of the fence. So like, I think they really need for each criteria to really, give the arguments for both variants they're asking for. I think they made general, statements for both, and I think it would be helpful if they kind of separated it out a bit. It might help them too also.
Yeah,
Thank you, that's a good point.
They just didn't answer the question in either of the applications, so.
Yeah. Okay, you want to go to the next element, Luis? Yeah, this is a disjuncture. Like, it is definitely substantial if they want to speak to why they need a substantial variance. When you reach out to them, Luis, you should remind them that we're constrained to grant the smallest possible variance under the law. So if they're going to ask for a 100% departure from the law, they need to have a really compelling argument other than just to say in a conclusory manner that they need security for anti-Semitic incidences. And they mentioned the national scene later on in the application, but they really need to make an argument about anti-Semitic incidents in Albany, the surrounding capital region. They should address whether they've ever asked the police for assistance, whether, as Martin pointed out in the alternatives, whether they had tried various types of screening and cameras and security and that kind of stuff. So this needs to be a lot more meaty answer, and it really needs to address why they need such a substantial variance. Does anyone else, do any other board members have things they want to add to this? Okay, let's go on to the next element then, please. Does anyone have any questions about this? I think it's self-explanatory, but okay, let's
I think that no problem. The answer to this element seems kind of conclusory also. So is it okay to be conclusory in some parts and not in other parts? And I see that the staff comments agreed with this part, but I know in the past we've asked them to give a little bit more in their explanation rather than just say just be conclusory, you know? So I'm just curious, just point of information.
Yeah, I mean, they should try and what they say, well, there will be no adverse impacts on. And your point is a good one, because one of the questions is traffic circulation. It won't affect the traffic necessarily on the non-through street and on the through street, but it will certainly affect traffic going in and out of the back of the temple. Whether they want to leave that alone or address that, I think you're right. We should at least make them aware that they may want to try and make a better argument. But generally, we look at drainage, or I should say Martin, who is our drainage expert, looks at drainage, odor, noise, you know, whether they're putting a new impact upon the city's infrastructure, that kind of stuff, which I think doesn't look like they're doing, but yeah. Any other comments from the board on this element? Okay, could you keep going into the next element then, Louise? And this is, you know, I think as much as they need to say, because they're right. This is a problem that that is the request for a variance is something they created. Okay. So before we move on to looking at staff's comments, does anyone have any other things that they want to add to this so far? Because I think, do we want to, and by the way, do we want to kibitz on staff comments, or should we just take them as they are? I don't have a preference one way or the other, folks. Okay, could you step us through the staff comments again, please, Louise? Let's see. For this one, I think this speaks a little bit to what we were saying, which is national crime statistics, and that argument does not normally speak to character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties. So unless they can do a better job of that, they're missing a significant part of this element and what would be necessary, one thinks, to grant any variance, much less a variance this large.
Also, I think there's something to be said for the fact that the variance runs with the land. So we're granting this, if we were to grant this variance, it would be in perpetuity, whether the tenant of the building was the applicant or not. And so I think they need to really stress why it is this fence for this property is needed as opposed to the use of the property. I think it would also set an odd precedent for us if we were to move forward, because anyone could come forward and say, this is a reason why I need a variance based upon a perception or some data that was provided on a national scale. And I think that would be a difficult decision for us to be able to not set a precedent for moving forward.
I think that's true, and it's worth the board remembering that we frequently get perceived danger from. We had a DV case where someone was worried about the next door neighbor attacking them. We've had others that worried about people coming over the fence, dogs going over the fence. So there's always sort of an argument about safety, which I think we've rejected most of the time. Although if you could take a look at that, Luis, and see if we've ever granted a variance on someone else's perception of safety, with the exception of the one where there was a neighbor with a restraining order, I think, against them from, what was that, like 3 years ago, Martin?
Yeah, and they submitted documentation from the police department to just show that the neighbor had come over the fence multiple times. And
yeah. So we could potentially consider this issue of crime statistics, but we'd need more, at least based on that prior precedent from what the board's done. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you, Louise?
Yeah, that makes sense. I recently did a little bit of a review on fences. I think I found 11 recent cases, and I think only 2 of them were granted. And I think one of them was the ones you're referring to.
Yeah. Could you circulate that to the board again? Because I think most of the board wasn't with us at that point in time.
Yep, will do.
I think maybe Adriana was, but that would be about it at this point. And Martin, since we're talking about it. Okay, could you go to the next staff comment, Louise? Do you want to skip back to 2? Sorry. I think we pretty much asked if you could get them to clarify the points that you have in the first 3 points. Again, we could theorize why they have chain link in one place and et cetera, but they should just state how that meets the benefit that they're trying to achieve. And I think the last one just goes to our point that they need to be more discursive on what the alternatives were that they tried, because staff comment here that maybe police, some kind of another different ordinance or some kind of police action or some kind of changes in their security measures taken on the building might make sense. And then they also, to the extent your comment is, or staff's comment is suggesting these things, what do other synagogues do around the country that have the same level of concern as we do or more? I mean, this is a place for them to put evidence in, because this is a massive variance. And as Martin pointed out, it's going to set a precedent if we were to grant it, even in part. Okay, could you skip to 3 unless, are there any other questions from the board?
No, it just seems like there's construction going on at somebody's microphone.
Not here. I bet it's Philip.
No, I think it was me. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Could you move ahead to 3 then, Louise? And we'll ignore the jackhammering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if you could bring to the applicant's attention the 3rd point made by staff, Louise, that would be helpful. Does the board have any other things that they'd like to ask? I mean, they do acknowledge that this is substantial. It may be that they're not thinking about just how substantial the variance is, and our burden, again, with regard to the giving of these variances. Okay, any other comments from the board, or should we move on to number 4? And I'll take silence as a yes. Let's move on. I think if just a reminder to address those issues that Serena brought up with regard to this element, Luis, and I think, again, they need to do a little more than just make a conclusory statement, pretty much for all the questions. Do you want to move to element 5, Luis? Yeah. I don't have anything for this one. Does anyone else have any things that they'd like Luis to communicate to the applicant so that we can address those issues at the public hearing? Okay. I think that we're good for this one, Luis, unless anyone has any last thoughts that they want to say before we move on. Hearing none. Okay.
Thank you. So the next case is 40 South Manning Boulevard. And this is for Brett and Alicia Sears. And they are representing themselves. This is in a single family, medium density residential neighborhood, R1M. The variances here are for a similar case. So they're proposing a 6-foot, 100% opaque fencing in front yard area, totaling 58 linear feet. And as such, we would need a variance to allow a 6-foot height fence where 4 foot is the maximum allowed, and a 100% opacity where 60% is the maximum allowed. Now, apologies, I did complete this PowerPoint, but I don't think it's saved right because I was doing it from work and then I came home. So I'm just going to pull up the case file and walk through it that way, if you don't mind. One moment while I pull that up.
Perfectly fine.
All right, does everyone see the document here? Okay.
Yes.
So the to start, the first character of the neighborhood, the applicant submitted an application. We had a meeting prior to and kind of went over the arguments, for the fence and all that, and the board's typical requests to have more of a complete argument. So the applicant was indicating here that one of the reasons for this was privacy. The benefits being identified here are privacy, and that the property is unique in that the frontage they have for the front yard in consideration for the variance is along Myrtle Avenue, which is a pedestrian street. So along this stretch of Myrtle Avenue, there's actually a barrier in between the two sides of the street. So a vehicle cannot actually cross that, and it only has space for pedestrians to cross through. So there is not through traffic there, only the traffic of cars coming in and out of the a couple of properties that are on that specific corner of Myrtle. As mentioned here, there's not a vehicle thoroughfare, doesn't have heavy vehicle traffic. So as such, the applicant is indicating that the fence is a characteristic of the neighborhood in the sense that other properties have it. In an email that was submitted between the applicant and I, the applicant had provided some examples, which I think are on this document here, right? 115 South Manning Boulevard. So this property here actually had a variance given to them in 1994 by the Board of Zoning Appeals, specifically for a 6-foot fence, 100% opacity. So this is also a corner lot, and the decision in that one was advised that the condition was placed on the variance that a hedge, natural screening, was to be placed in front of the fence, and that the board recognized the difficulty of having a corner lot and the two frontages, but that the hedge, the natural screening in front of the 6-foot fence was a reasonable alternative to just a 6-foot fence. And these are some examples of some properties. These I've checked most of the ones that were submitted here, and none of these have variance except one of them. However, I think I have the address, and I'll let you know when I have. Let's see the one it is. This one does not have a variance. So these wouldn't be comparable because they don't have variances issued to them, and I think the applicant is aware of that.
That's a everyone else was speeding argument.
Right. Okay, so alternatives considered. So the benefits identified were privacy, and the least amount of extra financial burden and maintenance. So the applicant did indicate here that the property was unique and that it was a corner property and has a pedestrian walkway as opposed to a typical vehicle throughway. And
Can I stop it there? Are we familiar with any houses in the city that occupy corner lots that do not have pedestrian access on their corner lot? Like if I think every single house in the city on a corner lot has pedestrian activity on both sides. That's the norm for any corner lot.
right. Well, I
So
think what
I
they
don't
were,
know if I find that argument compelling that the property is unique and that there are pedestrians. I live on a corner as well, and we have pedestrian traffic, but it's a public dead end street. So sorry, I'm struggling with that argument.
the alternative considered here was installing arborvitae trees. So they indicated that they had talked to a gardener and they indicated that the trees should be placed 3 or 4 feet apart, and that it would stretch along 48 feet of the property, and it would require about 12 trees, that the trees sell $129 each, and the extra expense would be over $2,000. And it would still not fully enclose the yard, and it would still compromise the privacy, and they would need additional arborvitaes to fully gain adequate privacy around the property adjacent to the driveway. So by comparison, they indicated that the cheaper alternative would be $1,550, or 48-foot stretch of opaque fencing. Being a cheaper alternative, and the economic burden would not be as high, and the required time it would take for the trees to mature, or the bushes to mature to a 6-foot height.
So, Luis, could you scroll back up a little bit to the $450 they're saying that the fence would cost? Could we get the applicant to provide us with the actual quote? Because I've never seen a fence that cheap. Is this a plastic fence?
I believe it was vinyl, right?
Usually these fences cost thousands of dollars. So
Yeah.
this is really, really inexpensive. Our typical fence is some kind of, particularly these palisades, is some kind of wood, whether it's cedar or not cedar, or, Okay.
Would you just want the price of the actual fence or the installation of it too, Richard? That, because I know that gets expensive also.
Yeah.
Especially now with the price of lumber has gone up 300%.
Right.
Are you building something, Martin?
No, there was a New York Times article about it,
Ah.
about how expensive construction is now. And I've been to Lowe's recently to buy 2x4s and walked out of there feeling like I got kicked in the head. Lumber's really expensive right now.
Yeah. I think your point, Martin, about the fact that every corner property in the city has a similar burden. And in fact, that's one of the arguments for why corner properties, the two corners, the two sides of the corner, get treated as a front yard, because people do walk by it. If nobody walked by it, you wouldn't have to treat it in that manner.
And I guess this alternative considered, yeah, I think it's nice that they did do, spell out an alternative considered, but I guess maybe they could treat also considering getting a fence that meets the city code. I mean, that would be an alternative that maybe they could, I don't know, that maybe they should mention whether they considered it and why it doesn't work.
Yeah, they need to flesh this out a little bit. You're right, Adriana, because we've talked before with applicants about a code compliant fence or again, the least possible variance plus screening, because if it would only take 3 to 5 years for the arborvitae to grow up, and the example they showed us of the plants in front of the fence looked like there was some additional privacy from that. So they might need to be a little bit more, again, try and answer the question a little bit more thoroughly.
The applicant did separate the application variances for height and opacity. So there is a second one separate for the height and then the opacity, which I'm not sure if that addresses the request completely. I admit I don't know the application verbatim to know if they actually mentioned a compliant fence net as an alternative considered. I brought it up, but we'll check and make sure.
Okay. Does anyone have any other things they'd like to hear from the applicant before we get to the public hearing on this topic?
I think in the past, some people have provided, in their efforts to minimize the variance, discussed a 4-foot fence with a 2-foot semi-opaque top. There's a lot of them that I've seen. I don't know if they've been installed legally, but that is one method. Some people have tried to meet the spirit of the law, but still have a taller fence.
Yeah, and I think the way, Luis, to mention that to the applicant is they have this as sort of a zero-sum game. It's either expensive arborvitae or what they want without a whole lot of some combination of things to get to the benefit that they want. Again, presenting us with the least possible variance or doing it without a variance, which is one of the alternatives they're supposed to put in front of us. Okay, does anyone else have any comments on this topic, or we can move to the next one? Okay, let's move on, Luis.
All right, for substantiality, they did mention that it is a 66% departure from the current code, and could be a significant departure, but did mention the 115 South Mining Boulevard variance where that opacity was allowed in that case.
Under prior zoning.
Yeah. They should probably actually state whether they think it is substantial or not, since they don't actually answer that question. Again, we're having to imply from a incomplete answer.
It looks like there's also like one more bit to the alternatives considered right above, like that paragraph there at the top of the page, which I guess I appreciate the effort to consider another alternative. Oh, it looks like, yeah, there's a bunch more. Okay. In here, actually. Anyway, I can go read it in more detail for the board meeting.
Yeah, the compliant fence I think is mentioned here,
Yes.
which the applicant indicated would reduce their usable yard space. Sorry for my dog.
Yeah. Again, this is sort of a zero-sum game. They could have a compliant fence along the section of the property where they wouldn't lose any usable yard space, and then again ask for the least possible variance. And they should try and take their cafeteria plan of options and come up with something that is lesser or least variant. Okay, does anyone have any questions on impact on the environment and self-created difficulty? No. All right, if you could just communicate with them and ask them to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way they address the alternatives, to try and not make it a zero-sum argument. And again, to try and present us with the least possible variance, among other things. Does anyone have any other comments that they want to toss in on this?
Richard, did you see? It looks like we got a comment from the applicant.
Chat box. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll be able to make their presentation to us at the public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, and if Luis, if you could find the other lawful fence of this nature that was in the examples that they presented to us, that might be helpful. I don't know. But as Martin pointed out, the 1994 case was under different zoning, among other things. All right, does anyone have anything else for this this case?
Just sorry, just to give you that answer. It was 44 South Pine, this one right here.
Got it. And it has, as Martin pointed out, the top is an attempt to be more compliant with the code. Okay. So these are only two new cases, Luis?
Yes, so those are two new cases. The other case is 1415 Washington Avenue Extension and 255 Clinton Avenue do not have decisions from the planning board as of yet. I've been following up with the planning board staff person, Zach, and he indicates that there may be a decision coming for 255 Clinton this month. So, you know, if they make that decision on Tuesday, the day before the meeting, then the board may be in a position to be able to set forth the motion. But that 1415 Washington Avenue currently is still under review for potential pedestrian infrastructure negotiations for that project. So there is not clear when action will be taken on that. So at the board's discretion, I can remove that item from the agenda and put it back on once the decision has been made for either project.
Yeah, why don't you take off 1415? If we have a likelihood that we might get a decision on the other property, then let's leave it on for now. It's been on for a couple of months, but if they're close, then we have a chance to do a motion on seeker, then we should. And we might as well leave it so that people have an expectation that we may act on it at the next meeting. Okay.
In the last case, 36 Jetson, from my understanding, the applicants are negotiating, so I'm not sure if you want to take that off the agenda. It's your discretion as well.
That has been on our agenda for over a year with absolutely no news or updates or changes or evidence or testimony. Like, it is just sat on the agenda. And every time we ask for updates, they say, oh, we're still negotiating. It's
so easy,
really frustrating to carry a
easy
case
answer
on the agenda.
then. You're right, Martin. And as you may remember, the board prior to this administration used to have cases on the agenda for years where nothing would happen. And we'd like to not do that if possible.
I'll also say most of the members on the board that are here now, if we were to vote on that case, never had any opportunity to hear testimony from the city or the applicant or anyone in the neighborhood. And so it's really frustrating to have a case that just sits there in the city. I don't know, does nobody want us to do anything about it? Because now I feel like we make a decision and it's going to be either uninformed or it's going to be something that most of us can't even think about. It was so long ago. And some of the problems that may have been cited at the time with the need for us to intervene, so to speak, and decide whether this was a nuisance or not, may have dissipated. So I would really like for staff to say to the city, if we don't get any sort of update, we will take action and at the next meeting.
So
Nobody has
Martin?
said anything about this case.
Okay, so Martin, we should take it off the agenda for now. It's not
Absolutely.
a pending case. As you remember from the meeting before the one that you presided at, which was 2 meetings ago, I had suggested to Philip, I think that was Philip's first meeting, and also to Luis, that we would need a refresh of all the evidence that was provided at the time because the evidence is now stale. So that would be, among other things, I think, and Philip can carry that back to Corp Counsel and to the mayor's office, because that's only reasonable. Making a decision upon stale data is not what we want to do. With regard to the members of the board not having been on, I remember that was something that concerned you when you first joined the board, and you abstained from some cases that you had not heard the argument for.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remember, both in the guidebook from the Department of State and in the ethics training that we took, there's no requirement to do that because board members are presumed in the law to look at the record and to be able to educate themselves by visiting the property and looking at the record before we take a vote.
I certainly
They would
understand
have
that.
access. Could I finish, please?
Yeah.
They would have access to the recordings and to the record. Go ahead.
I understand that from a perspective of a case where we're discussing a land use issue, but that was the case about a nuisance issue where it was, I'll say the problems were not land. I don't know. I don't want to characterize it any way unfairly. It seems crazy to me that this has languished for what feels like almost 2 years. And the whole case was based upon activity at this particular location rather than an element of an area variance or a use variance. And to me, it's, I don't know if it's stale is even a strong enough word for that.
No, understood, Martin. And I think the comment that you made that we should tell the city that we would act anyway would be on the basis of the data that you don't want people to make decisions on the board. So I think that's a circular problem, if nothing else. At best, so Philip, and hang on a sec, Martin. Philip and Luis, if you could tell the mayor's office that we're removing it from the agenda, that we don't believe that we should make a decision without the proffer of updated evidence from the parties in the proceeding, that and they may understand that that means that we feel that this has dragged on too long. And I'll undertake also to talk to Dave Gallen, since I think he may be the city's lead negotiator, or the Corp Counsel is. And I'll talk to them and ask them to give us an update on where they are. You do understand, though, that to the extent that they're negotiating, it is confidential, and they shouldn't give us any of the conversations that they've had. They may be able to give us a sort of a, we think it's close or something like that, but probably not a lot more without undermining the confidentiality of the negotiation and the ability for the parties to speak their minds, because if that is then, if the confidentiality is breached, that can be used against them in subsequent litigation. And so obviously they're not going to want to do that. Philip, do you want to speak to this at all, or?
Well, I was just going to say that I did bring this up with Corp Counsel last time we talked about it. You know, I mean, she told me that she would get back to you about that. So the fact that, you know, this is, as Martin pointed out, still on the agenda with literally no movement whatsoever suggests that I don't really know that we're going to have any sort of movement unless like I don't even know what we can do about it at this point. Like, I mean, you know, as has been pointed out, it's just languishing in negotiations over and over. So, you know, I can certainly speak with Corp Counsel again tomorrow, see if we can get any sort of movement there, but I don't know what that's going to do at this point, honestly.
Okay, but these are options that we can explore for the time being. Luis, take it off the agenda, and that'll also send a delicate signal that we don't believe that we can act on it based on the old data, which has not been updated to the present, we would probably require full testimony again from the appellant and the respondent, because they have the right to argue that things have changed, and they may have, who knows? And I'll reach out to the mayor's office and see if they can give us something that is in the nature of an update. So thanks, Philip, and thanks, Luis, in advance. And hopefully we'll have some direction or at least some comment from City Hall, but for the time being, moving it off the agenda, I think sends a message that there has to be some next steps. This has dragged on a while. Okay. Does anyone else have any comments on this case from the board? Or should we jump off and go about knowing all of you, all your other voluntary activities and who knows what? Okay. Thanks, everybody. As always, let's bring the meeting to a close, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. And I actually will see you. And maybe in 6 months or so, we'll be able to see each other in person and have these meetings back live again.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.